America, my name is Osei-Frimpong. I come to you live every Monday and Thursday. Monday I do a relationship show. Thursday I do a politics show. I'm going to talk about Israel today, and I'm going to talk about Israel as a failed experiment. Let me just run through a quick relevant history. In the 40s, we kind of Louisiana Purchase Israel insofar as with the Louisiana Purchase, the Americans bought the Native Americans' land from the French and expanded our country that way. Turned out in the 1940s, the British gave the Israelis, created the Israelis with the Palestinians' land. So, they had this extra colony laying around because up until the 40s, the British still owned quite a bit of the world, including my ancestral Ghana. So the Israelis had land. They were just, not the Israelis, the British had land. They were given away because they thought it was theirs. It turns out they were a colonial power, and they kind of gave their colonial power land to the Jewish people as a recompense for the atrocities that were suffered from the genocide. And it kind of made sense that history kind of suggested that there was no land in which Jewish people would remain safe, so we got to give them a land because they're people too. I can understand the argument. I mean, that's not as offensive as the problem was we gave them other people's land. Like I'm for moving Israel. I'll get to that later, but I'm pro moving Israel. I like the Michael Chabon solution where we just kind of put Israel in Alaska, or we could kind of cede them New Mexico. Look, if we're going to defend a state and we're going to be casual about guaranteeing these people a state, an ever expanding state, because you can, it's the mixing of property rights and birth citizenship, then we should be able to control the land and control the borders and secure them that way rather than just be casual with other people's lands and other people's borders. Right. So I would be open to talks about ceding New Mexico or ceding, some land in the United States or the United States controls to Israel and making a new Israel. We got to move Israel because the current Israel is in a bad spot. We sold someone else's land, or we gave away things that didn't belong to us. It'd be like me selling the Brooklyn Bridge. And that's always going to be a problem. So we have some 750,000 people were moved, or have been moved, and now we have 2 million abouts people in the area that's known as the Gaza Strip. And the problem is those Palestinians are not allowed to really do anything, because it turns out that if you give people who you've stolen their land and livelihood access to doing anything, one of the things they're going to do is figure out how to get their land and livelihood back and probably take it back with force. You moved them out with force, they're going to try to take it back with force. So you have blockades, you have sieges, because they're trying to keep 2 million people from actually building anything, because one of the things that those people will also build is the means to get their land back. And this all happened in 47. 47 is not that long. That's the year my mom was born. It's not really, this isn't bad. So right, I mean, this isn't that long ago, and we're talking about a good amount of people, right? An amount of people and so now it's the case that the blockade such that it precludes the conditions for the people in Gaza to be self-determining, because one of the things they will use, and this is, I think, true, if you give them water, if you give them food on demand, if you give them all of the things that are conditioned with like full citizenship, they will use that subjective freedom to create the objective conditions for a fight back, right? And so in order to keep them from fighting back, we keep them from doing everything that's consistent with self-determination. If they elect leaders we don't like, we validate the elections. And I say we because I'm not convinced that Israel and the United States aren't the same power. I actually think that we're a colonial power. We are a colony of Israel and not the other way around. Don't get it confused. A lot of people get this confused and think that the U.S. runs Israel, but I think Israel runs the U.S. insofar as they can say, shut up and give us money and guns, and we'll shut up and give them money and guns. And if we say the same thing, they will just ignore us. So, or we would be too scared to say the same thing because our politicians need a lot of money from Jewish people who are not necessarily the same Zionists, who are, the problematic actors in Israel, but they're not exactly antagonistic to those Zionists in the way that I would need them to be antagonistic to those Zionists. I hear a lot of, there are multifaceted forms of supporting and fighting against some of the more obnoxious and heinous policies of Israel, and you're just kind of painting the Israelis and their sympathizers with a broad brush. And I'm saying that the anti-Israel apartheid side of the Jewish people in the United States are not sufficiently anti. They're lukewarm anti. Because they're not talking about we need to abolish Israel and move it to Alaska. Though, if there were a significant number of Jewish people said there's no two-state solutions untenable, and it was part of the culture and part of the even heterodox Jewish culture to say two-state solutions untenable, we need to abolish Israel and move it to a place where we actually control the borders, which I think is actually a responsible solution. We need to move it to New Mexico. We need to move it to Arizona. I actually think that would be a responsible solution. You just get up and move. New Israel. Give them half of Utah. It could be the state the chosen people choose, right? Because you got the Mormons who consider themselves chosen, and Jewish people consider themselves chosen. And people say I'm going to lose a lot of money because of this video, and I might even get demonetized. So you need to go over to www.funkyacademic.com because I'm also in academia. So I'm risking my job prospects and the future of my kids trying to give you a cogent way to understand the world's problems. So go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, or $50. And I say this because a lot of people in academia are either Jews, especially in philosophy, or scared of Jews. And that is just the way it is. And it's not to say that there's going to be retaliation, but there very well could be a retaliation, and there's nothing you can do to save me except go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, or $50. Oh, by the way, this distinction between cultural Judaism and Zionism, it's not a hard as fast distinction. And, I didn't really know this until I just went to a random synagogue for a Shabbat a few years ago with a buddy. It was just, a regular mainline synagogue, nothing special. And they folded in a prayer for Israel into the synagogue. And you could say, well, it was just peace for Israel. And actually that prayer was more support for Israel than just peace. But if you want peace without eradicating the conditions of injustice, you're pretty much just praying for an apartheid government. And when I say an apartheid government, that's two systems of laws for two different people. And now it's not a racial apartheid insofar as we're not punishing because they are browner or Muslim, but we're just saying, but because they're browner and Muslim, they're going to be more likely to organize against us. So we have to have a different system of law for them. So it's not the same kind of apartheid as South African apartheid, but it's the same in objective expression. Because I think rightly they understand that if the Palestinians in Gaza are empowered and aren't too busy trying to figure out food and water and the hospitals, they will use some of that excess resource, some of the disposable income and insight to figure out how to get their land back. And that's something that's untenable for Israel. So they have to keep an apartheid system in order to keep the Palestinians weak enough. They have to keep them weak. This is never about, Gaza's not about autonomy. It's about being able to neuter a population without going full genocide. Especially when you're a nation that's founded, whose moral authority is we're the response to a genocide. You can't go full genocide on the Palestinians, but you also can't have them doing anything, because one of the things that they will do is try to get their land back. And for people who say it's senseless violence to go shoot up a music festival, well, it's not senseless insofar as nobody knows what the conditions, the path forward for Palestinian autonomy. I'm not one to second guess the leaders of Hamas. It's not necessarily what I would do, but I don't know. I don't have a workable plan. I don't think there is a workable plan short of the U.S. saying like, no, we're not going to support that Israel anymore. We're going to give you a different spot, a different Israel, one that we can control. And that's what our support looks like. And if you don't want to go to our new Israel, either it's in Alaska, it's part of Utah. If you don't want to go to that new Israel, you're on your own. That would be my solution. And that's no less senseless or sensible. I mean, I think, yeah, that's my solution. If we're going to displace people and support the displacing of people, we should support the displacing of our own people for our cause. And if we're not willing to do that, we shouldn't be displacing others like that so casually. And if Zionists say like, no, we want Tel Aviv and we want Jerusalem. These are holy cities for us. And I say the world isn't like Burger King. You don't get to have it your way. You want land that's safe, and you want a nation and you want secure borders. The U.S. can provide that, but you're not going to be able to pick the land. This idea that you get born into particular property claims, not like specific naturally given property claims, you get born into that by some sort of birthright or religious right. Not property claims in general, but like particular ones. Jerusalem, not like, Orem, Utah. you get the idea that you would get those claims is ridiculous. It's a kind of entitlement that I think we've bred among the Zionists that we need to stop breeding. I can see the argument that as a person, in order to be a free person in the modern world, you need some sort of property. But I don't see the argument that you get to also pick the property you get, right? So if we're going to guarantee you property, then we should do it under our own property, right? And so since I don't have a path forward that is nonviolent, I'm not going to second guess what Hamas does in the name of violence. Because look, one of the purposes of nonviolent civil disobedience is to show the degradation of your oppressors, right? Nonviolent civil disobedience doesn't work when people just want you dead. Like a lot of Zionists would be happy if everyone just like miraculously died in Gaza. They just kind of disappeared. Right? They're not particularly useful to the economy in that way, in the same way that, for example, black people were useful to the economy in the American South, or, Hindus and Indians were useful to the economy in India. It's not that kind of shutdown when nonviolence can work. There's no boycott that will actually help the case. There's no boycott that will force a quality of violence that will show the disproportionate violence and the inhumanity that you're being subject to. And that's the point of nonviolent resistance. You're trying to provoke the quality of violence to show that, like, no, the people who are trying to kill us really do think that they're humans. We're inhuman. Right? And you can't do that with nonviolence in Gaza, but you might be able to do that with violence. Right? So you do a little bit of ridiculous violence, or a little bit of horrendous violence, and then they come back like leveling hospitals. They can no longer say like, well, you're killing children and women. And it's like, well, you're leveling hospitals indiscriminately. Hamas doesn't have a base of operations that you know of. If you do, you would send in Mossad and take them out. You don't have it. So you're just leveling hospitals to show a vague sense of power. That's a form of terrorism. So that's what's happening right. That's the shelling that's happening right now. And, I'm not one to say that Hamas was wrong because I don't know what's right. I know filling out the paperwork and waving signs isn't going to work. It's not going to get you autonomy. It's not going to get you clean water. You can't do anything. You can't build anything. You have a life and your children will have a life, and, a short life in Gaza because they don't have any of the conditions for a long life, including clean water and a robust self-governing apparatus, is going to be overdetermined by the needs of a settler power, which is Israel, to make sure that you can't form the quality of organization and industrial capacity that would attack Israel, right? So like that's going to be your line is going to be as a second class, necessarily subordinate citizen who by design isn't going to be able to coordinate to do anything meaningful. And that is the situations of the Palestinians right now. And that isn't going to happen as long as Israel's there. Like, I don't think a two-state solution is viable because, Palestinians want their land. they want their land. And the Israelis feel very entitled to the Palestinians' land. Like, so you need to, if Israel, the Jewish people deserve a state to return to, then we need to create a different state. So it was a failed experiment, and we need to just take the L and carve out a little bit of West Virginia or whatever, give them some of Nebraska or Oklahoma, and call that New Israel, and that'll be that. And if we're not willing to do that, we need to not like poo-poo the Palestinians who are rightly fighting for the conditions of their self-determination. Like civil self-determination, family self, like all of these things are overdetermined by the blockade and the abject control that they're suffering under Israeli rule. And that's the situation right there. Israel won't let the Palestinians do anything because one of the things that the Palestinians will do is organize to attack Israel. And so I understand the blockade, but I also understand how that's like not a tenable way to think through like a long term, and that doesn't actually get rid of the problem. Like the forever conditions of apartheid are not going to get rid of the problem. Anytime Palestinians get a little bit of air to breathe, they're going to use that air to try to attack Israel, which I think maybe, and there's reason for them to do that. And so now Israel now has an incentive to make sure that Palestinians don't ever get any sort of disposable anything, the capacity to build and take care of themselves and frustrate the plans of other people, right? So I just, it was a failed experiment. It was a failed experiment in colonialism. We gave people land that wasn't ours to give, or we sanctioned the British giving the Israelis land that they weren't sanctioned to give, and this is the fallout of it. And it's not going to go away. It's not going to go away. A two-state solution is not viable because it's the Palestinians' land. Because it's the Palestinians' land. And if we had just a little bit more humility, we would just be honest and think about land we do control and just ask the Jews to suck it up. Suck it up. Now you go to Utah instead. We tried Israel there, and they're going to be like, no, we want Jerusalem. I'm going to say, sorry. You don't get you don't get to both get land and get where you don't get to both cut the cake and choose which slice you get. And Michael Chabon talked about this in his book, The Yiddish Policeman's Detective Agency. It came out, I want to say 2007-ish, and where the new Israel was up in Alaska. And I think it's a more responsible solution because the problem is the place. The problem is the place. And the fact that it wasn't your land to begin with. And for someone, and like this whole idea that it was a senseless killing, that going after the music festival is a senseless killing. I'm like, these people never read the end of the Odyssey. Where, if someone steals your house, throws a party in your house, and you come home and you mow them down, that's not exactly senseless. They stole your house, right? And at the end of the Odyssey, Odysseus comes in, there are a bunch of suitors and a party going on, and he looks around and just mows them all down because like they were in his house. They had no business being there. So this idea, it's not senseless, it's not barbaric, it makes sense. And I wish I wish I knew how to decolonialize without this kind of violence. I wish I did. I don't. So I'm not going to criticize the Hamas leaders who think this is the only way, because it might be the only way. And it's the only reason I'm talking about it. So, and if the more people who actually talk about this situation, I think the better it is for the Palestinian case. So it might be the case that this imbalance actually saves lives, because if we get to a solution through a national discourse or with if we get to a place with a solution, then these are going to be the fewer number of lives saved, because right now the standard of living and the length of living in Palestine is not particularly high, in Gaza is not particularly high, because of the blockade and the seizures and the control. You don't live very long if you're in a concentration camp. You don't live very long in an open air prison, right? So I don't know. The loss of life might actually increase the loss of life, this ongoing violence, if it gets people to talk about why to withdraw support from Israel and offer different solutions. And like I said, my solution is just we annex a part of the U.S. Let's be honest, nobody in the Muslim world loves the Palestinians anyway. They might be Muslim, but they're poor. Right? So it's not as if it's not as if like the Jordanians or the Egyptians want to jeopardize all of their relationships to take in a bunch of Palestinian refugees. So it's a problem. Also, we need to talk about the problem of having property rights tied to a religious identity. There's something immodern about that and inappropriate about that. Having someone else's property rights tied, like because you're a certain religion, you get property claims, and it's anti-Semitic to say that that's a dicey use of religion. There are going to be problems with state-sponsored religions, and they're going to be sponsored with religion-sponsored states, and especially with the diaspora, where now, I'll be honest, with the cultural imbrication of loose, soft Zionism with American Judaism, it's not really the case that you can trust that American Jews, with respect to this issue, actually have America's interest at heart. It's simply not the case. Like when I cheer for the World Cup and Ghana and the US is playing, it's very complicated for me. I ultimately choose the underdog, but it's very complicated for me. I don't even think it's that complicated for a lot of American Jews with respect to Israel, with respect to of course they're going to have special pleading for the sake of Israel. And I think that's a problem. So you really shouldn't have religious states and a diaspora, religiously founded states, and have that folded into the cultural practice. And this practice of folding in a prayer, not necessarily either for peace or for just strength and stability of Israel, into Jewish practice in America, actually has transnational effects, right? So if you're just praying for peace in Israel, what you're doing is praying for the Palestinians not to fight back, to stop fighting back, which I think is a problem. So if we're not praying for Israel, we're praying for peace. Well, you're praying for the Palestinians not to fight back. You're not praying for the destruction of Israel, which I think is the only way to get real peace. You need to take the L on the Israel where we planted it. And if you want another Israel, I'm open to conversations about what part of the U.S. we annex and call New Israel. I'm open to that conversation. Now, if you say no, we need Jerusalem, I'll say that's a tough for you. That's a you problem. Now you're being greedy. You're being Burger King. You want to have it your way. You don't get to cut and choose. You don't get to pick the state you want and that you get a state. I'm saying I'm open to arguments for a Jewish state. I'm just not open for arguments for a Jewish state on someone else's land that I don't control. But that's what I'm talking about. And we just need to admit that Israel's a failed experiment as it is. And Israel's a failed experiment as it is. And it's a forever war. And they cannot let Palestinians grow and thrive, which means it's just a conditions for injustice. And the only reason they can't let Palestinians grow and thrive, because if Palestinians grow in any way, one of the things they will also do is try to organize to get their land back, which makes sense, right? So this is the internal logic of the entire state is against peace. And so we need to just take the L on the state, and that's it. And if, I don't know how long this video is going to be up, because I'm sure someone's going to call it anti-Semitic. And also, people think that, no, all right, so I don't know how long this video is going to be up. I'm sure people are going to call it anti-Semitic and might ask the algorithm to take it down. So if you support what I'm doing, or you continue doing what I'm doing, go ahead and go to www.funkyacademic.com, kick in $5, $15, or $50. By the way, I probably just took a pretty big pay cut over the course of my life, because, just in my vocations, a lot of what I do is controlled by Jews. Through media or through academics, and I study philosophy too. That's just the life. So if you support me having the kind of quality of courage that I do just talking like this, then go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, or $50 a month, and I will keep doing it, because I do think that these arguments are good. We need to talk about the internal logic that will always kind of sustain Palestinian terrorism, and in a way, and I'll say this, in a way it would have been easier or more neat if there was just a complete genocide, but that's untenable for the Israelis also because of their particular history, right? A complete genocide of the Palestinian people, not of the Jewish people. But that's untenable because of their history. They can't have a public genocide, right? So there's really just a rock and a hard place where you have to keep a people degraded in order to have your state. But then also you'll have degraded people. And anytime those degraded people, they're going to be like weeds. Anytime those people get like any sort of energy or oxygen, they're going to use that energy and oxygen to try to get their land back, which makes sense. So quit calling this senseless violence. It's a war. It's a forever war. What you have is it's a vaccine that's not quite weak enough. So you need to just keep them weak forever, and that's just not keep them in an unjust position forever, and that's just a problem. That's just a problem for justice, and we shouldn't be funding it. All right, take care. I will talk to you at another time on Monday, talking about something completely different. Bye.